Have you ever wondered why the moment you start getting close to someone, they suddenly pull away? At first, everything feels easy. The conversations flow. The connection feels real. They laugh with you. They open up. For a moment, it feels like you finally found someone who truly sees you. And then something changes. The replies become slower. The energy shifts. The warmth you felt just days ago starts to fade into silence. You start replaying every conversation in your head, searching for the exact moment things went wrong. Did you say too much? Did you care too much? Did you get too close? That question starts living in your mind, quiet at first, then louder every day. Because when someone pulls away without explanation, it creates a kind of confusion that's hard to escape. You want answers. You want clarity. Most of all, you want that feeling back, the one you had in the beginning when everything felt effortless. So you try to fix it. You send another message. Maybe something light. Maybe something honest. You try to show them you care. You try to remind them of the connection you shared. But something strange happens. The more you reach out, the further they seem to drift. What once felt natural now feels forced. Conversations that used to flow freely now feel heavy. You start feeling like you're the only one trying to keep something alive. And deep down, that feeling hurts more than rejection, because it leaves you stuck in uncertainty. But here's the truth most people never hear. When someone has an avoidant pattern, distance is not always about losing interest. It's about something much deeper happening inside their mind. For them, closeness can feel overwhelming. Intimacy can trigger a quiet alarm in their nervous system. The moment emotions start becoming real, a hidden instinct takes over, not to connect, but to protect. So they create space, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, but always in a way that leaves the other person confused. And if you've experienced this, you're not weak for feeling affected by it. Anyone would feel the same. Humans are wired for connection. When that connection disappears without warning, it triggers something powerful inside us, the need to understand, the need to repair. But the strategy most people use only makes the cycle stronger. They chase, they try harder, they give more attention, they show more emotion. They believe that if they just prove their loyalty, the distance will disappear. Yet with an avoidant, pressure rarely creates closeness. It creates escape. And that's the painful trap. The harder someone tries to hold on, the faster the avoidant feels the need to step back. This is why so many people walk away from these connections feeling like they weren't enough, like they somehow pushed the other person away. But the truth is very different. There is a moment in this dynamic that almost nobody recognizes, a moment where the entire pattern can shift. It doesn't happen through chasing, it doesn't happen through convincing, and it definitely doesn't happen through trying to prove your worth. It happens when the emotional energy in the connection changes, when something unexpected breaks the cycle both people have unknowingly stepped into. Because when that shift occurs, something surprising begins to happen inside the avoidant mind. The distance they once created so easily starts to feel different. The silence they once used to regain control starts to feel heavier, and eventually, something they rarely allow themselves to feel begins to surface. Curiosity, then awareness, and sometimes something even deeper. A realization that they may have just stepped away from someone who didn't try to control them, didn't overwhelm them, and didn't chase them into a corner. Someone who simply remained calm, present, unmoved by the push and pull. That realization plants a seed in their mind, a quiet question they can't ignore. And when that question grows strong enough, it leads to a moment that changes everything between you and them. That question starts to grow inside them. At first, they try to ignore it. Avoidant minds are experts at shutting doors. They distract themselves. They bury feelings under work, entertainment, anything that restores their sense of independence. For a while, it works. The distance feels comfortable again, quiet, controlled. But something is different now, because you didn't react the way they expected. You didn't chase them with desperate messages. You didn't demand explanations. You didn't flood them with emotions they weren't ready to handle. You simply stepped back, not with anger, not with revenge, with calm. And that calm becomes unsettling to them, because the avoidant pattern survives on predictability. They expect pressure when they create space. They expect emotional chaos when they pull away. When that chaos never comes, their mind begins searching for answers. Why didn't you fight for their attention? Why didn't you try to pull them back? Why are you still standing strong without them? These questions start quietly, but they grow louder with time. And curiosity is powerful. The human brain struggles to ignore unfinished stories. When something feels unresolved, the mind keeps returning to it again and again, trying to close the loop. You become that unfinished story. They begin remembering small things, your calm energy, your patience, the way you didn't try to control them. These memories surface when they least expect it, late at night, during quiet moments, in the spaces where distractions fade and honesty begins to creep in. That's when something uncomfortable appears. Respect. Because deep down, avoidant individuals fear losing themselves in relationships. They fear being trapped by someone else's expectations. They fear emotional pressure that feels impossible to escape. But when you stand firm without chasing, you send a completely different signal. You show them something rare. You show them emotional strength. Strength that doesn't beg. Strength that doesn't cling. Strength that simply exists. And that kind of strength is magnetic. It challenges the story they tell themselves about relationships. The story that closeness always leads to pressure. That intimacy always comes with demands. Your silence becomes louder than any message you could have sent. They start wondering if they misjudged you. They start wondering if they walked away from something they didn't fully understand. At the same time, another emotion begins creeping into their thoughts. Loss. Because when someone who once gave them attention suddenly becomes peaceful without it, the avoidant mind senses a shift in power. You are no longer orbiting around them. Your world did not collapse when they stepped back, and that realization shakes them more than arguments ever could. It creates tension inside them. Part of them still wants distance. Distance feels safe, familiar, controlled, but another part begins to feel something unfamiliar. Pull. A subtle emotional gravity drawing their attention back toward you. This internal conflict grows stronger every day the pattern stays broken. They check your presence more than they admit. They replay old conversations. They analyze your reactions. They try to understand why your absence feels different from others who walked away before. Most people who leave their life chase them first. You didn't. And that difference rewires the dynamic between you, because attraction often grows strongest where certainty disappears. When something becomes slightly out of reach, the mind assigns it greater value. You are no longer predictable. You are no longer easy to categorize. And the avoidant brain begins to do something it rarely allows itself to do. It begins to move closer, slowly, carefully, testing the space again. Sometimes through small messages, sometimes through subtle curiosity, sometimes through moments where they suddenly reappear in your world as if the distance never existed. But inside them, the emotional landscape is shifting. The walls they built for protection begin to crack, not because someone forced them down, but because they encountered something stronger than pressure. Your calm presence, your self-respect, your ability to remain whole even when the connection paused. And when someone with an avoidant pattern finally meets a person who doesn't chase their distance, something profound starts unfolding inside their mind. A realization that connection doesn't always mean losing control. A realization that closeness doesn't always bring emotional chaos. A realization that the person they stepped away from might actually be the safest place they've ever encountered. That realization becomes impossible to ignore. And once it reaches that point, their next move begins to reveal something they rarely show anyone. And when that realization finally breaks through their defenses, something inside them begins to change. The distance that once felt comfortable now feels strange. The silence that once protected them now feels heavy. They start sensing that something meaningful might have slipped through their hands. That's when the real tension begins. Because the avoidant mind is not used to sitting with emotions for long. For years, it learned how to escape them, how to push them away before they became too real. But this time, the feeling refuses to disappear. It stays. It follows them into quiet moments. It shows up in unexpected memories. The way you listened without pressure. The way you respected their space without punishment. The way you stayed grounded when others might have reacted with anger or desperation. These memories begin rewriting something deep inside their perception of you. You are no longer just another connection. You become the one who didn't break under distance, the one who didn't beg for attention, the one who somehow made space feel safe instead of threatening. And that realization creates something powerful inside them. Internal conflict. Part of them wants to return to the safety of distance, the life where emotions stay controlled and relationships never get too deep. But another part begins pulling them toward you. That part is quiet, but persistent. It whispers something they rarely allow themselves to believe. Maybe closeness doesn't have to feel like losing freedom. Maybe connection doesn't have to mean losing control. Maybe the problem was never intimacy itself. Maybe the problem was the kind of intimacy they experienced before. Because most avoidant people have spent years learning one painful lesson: that closeness leads to pressure, expectation, and emotional overwhelm. So they built walls, strong walls, walls that protected them from being consumed by someone else's needs. But when they encounter someone who respects those walls instead of attacking them, those defenses start to weaken, not through force, through safety. And safety is the one experience avoidants rarely feel inside relationships. Your calm energy introduces something their nervous system isn't used to: stability, predictability, emotional space. The absence of pressure becomes more powerful than any attempt to convince them to stay. For the first time, they start experiencing closeness without fear. And that is when something deeper begins happening beneath the surface. Trust. Not the loud kind people talk about. The quiet kind that grows slowly, almost invisibly. The kind that builds every time they realize you didn't try to control them. Every time they remember that you remained steady while the connection shifted. Every time they notice that your life kept moving forward without needing their constant presence. This quiet trust changes the way they look at you. You stop being someone who demands energy. You become someone who holds emotional strength. Someone who isn't chasing love, but allowing it. And that difference breaks the pattern they relied on for years, because their old script expected pursuit. Your calm rewrote the story. Now the distance they created no longer feels like power. It feels like risk. Risk of losing someone who might actually understand them. Risk of losing someone who didn't trigger their deepest fears. Risk of losing a connection that felt strangely peaceful compared to everything they experienced before. And once that awareness settles inside them, the pull becomes stronger. Stronger than their instinct to retreat. Stronger than their habit of emotional escape. They begin leaning closer to the very thing they once ran from. Not quickly. Avoidants rarely move quickly, but slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a door they once slammed shut, wondering if what's behind it might still be there. And when they finally gather the courage to open that door again, something powerful begins revealing itself in their words. Not dramatic words, not perfect words, but honest ones. Words that carry a vulnerability they rarely allow anyone to see. Words that expose the shift happening inside them. A shift that only happens when someone breaks the cycle without losing themselves. Because in that moment, they are no longer reacting to pressure. They are responding to something far more powerful. Respect, calm, and a connection that never tried to trap them. And when those honest words finally begin to surface, the moment feels almost unreal, because for so long, the connection felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. Silence where there should have been warmth, distance where there should have been closeness. You stood in that uncertainty, refusing to lose yourself in it. Now something is shifting, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. They start speaking with a different tone. The guarded edge in their voice softens. The emotional distance that once felt permanent begins to fade. It's subtle at first, but the energy between you changes. They linger in conversations longer than before. They ask questions they once avoided. They reveal small pieces of themselves that used to stay hidden behind those carefully built walls. And that is not an accident. Because when an avoidant begins to feel safe, the instinct to run slowly loses its grip. The same person who once pulled away now starts leaning closer. But the real moment arrives when the truth slips out. Not as a grand confession, not as some dramatic declaration of love. It comes quietly, almost like they're surprised by their own words. I don't know why, but I feel safe with you. Those words carry weight most people don't understand, because safety is the one thing avoidants rarely experience in relationships. Their past has taught them that closeness comes with pressure, that emotional intimacy leads to demands they cannot meet, that love eventually becomes something suffocating. So they learned to escape before things became too real. But with you, something unexpected happened. You never chased their distance. You never tried to force them to open up. You never made their walls the enemy. You simply stayed grounded, present, unmoved by the chaos that usually fuels these patterns. And in that space, their nervous system experienced something it had almost forgotten was possible. Peace. Not the fragile kind that disappears under pressure, the steady kind that grows stronger the longer it's felt. That peace is what breaks the avoidant cycle. Because when someone finally feels safe enough to stay, the instinct to run begins to lose its purpose. They no longer see closeness as danger. They start seeing it as possibility. And that moment changes everything. But here's the truth that matters even more than their words. The real victory was never about making them return. The real victory was what happened inside you. The moment you stopped chasing, the moment you refused to shrink your self-respect just to keep someone close. The moment you understood that love should never require you to abandon your own peace. That shift in you is what changed the entire dynamic. Because people with avoidant patterns are used to control. They know how to manage someone who chases them. They know how to escape someone who pressures them. But they rarely know what to do with someone who remains calm, strong, and emotionally steady. Someone who doesn't demand closeness, but also doesn't tolerate distance that costs them their dignity. That kind of presence is powerful. It sends a message without words. A message that says you value connection, but you value yourself more. And that message forces the avoidant mind to confront something it can't ignore. The possibility of losing someone rare, someone who didn't try to cage them, someone who didn't collapse when things became uncertain, someone who simply stood firm in their own emotional strength. That is the energy that changes people. Not manipulation, not pressure, not endless effort, strength, calm, self-respect. When you embody those things, something remarkable happens. You stop trying to convince people to stay. You start becoming someone they fear losing. And that shift echoes far beyond one relationship. It transforms the way every connection enters your life. Because the moment you stop chasing validation, you begin attracting respect. The moment you stop begging for closeness, you begin creating space for real intimacy. And the moment you refuse to lose yourself for love, you become someone whose presence carries undeniable power. That power is quiet, but it changes everything. That quiet power begins changing more than just one connection. It changes the way you see yourself. For a long time, your energy was focused outward. You watched their reactions. You studied their silence. You measured your worth through their attention. Every message, every pause, every shift in tone felt like a signal you had to decode. That kind of emotional tension slowly drains a person. It pulls your focus away from your own life and locks it onto someone else's distance. But the moment you step back and reclaim your center, something powerful begins happening inside you. Your mind becomes clearer. Your emotions become steadier. You stop reacting to every small movement in the connection. You stop living inside their uncertainty. And that shift changes the entire atmosphere between you. Because people can feel emotional stability. They may not understand it consciously, but their nervous system recognizes it immediately. Calm presence stands out in a world full of emotional noise. When you stop chasing validation, you begin radiating something different. Confidence. Not the loud kind that demands attention, the quiet kind that makes people pause, the kind that says you know your value, even in silence. That kind of energy disrupts the old dynamic completely. Before, the connection was built on imbalance. One person moving closer while the other stepped away. One person trying harder while the other protected their space. Now the energy becomes equal. You are no longer reaching for them. You are standing in your own life. And suddenly, they must decide how much they truly value your presence. That decision becomes heavier with every passing day, because people often take things for granted when they believe those things will always be there. But the moment they sense that something meaningful could disappear, their perception changes. The mind begins calculating loss, and loss is one of the strongest emotional triggers a human can experience. It sharpens attention. It increases value. It forces reflection. They begin seeing you through a new lens, not as someone who will always be waiting, but as someone who could move forward without them, someone who refuses to shrink their life for a connection that isn't mutual. That realization creates urgency inside them, a quiet pressure they place on themselves, because suddenly the question is no longer about escaping closeness. The question becomes whether they are strong enough to step toward it. And that question pushes them to confront something they have avoided for years, their own fears. Fear of vulnerability, fear of emotional exposure, fear that allowing someone closer might reveal parts of themselves they usually keep hidden. But when they remember the way you handled distance, those fears start losing their grip. You didn't punish their silence. You didn't explode with demands. You didn't collapse when the connection became uncertain. You stayed steady, and that steadiness becomes the foundation for something deeper. Trust. Trust that closeness with you does not mean losing control. Trust that emotional space will be respected. Trust that the relationship will not become a battlefield of pressure and expectation. For someone with avoidant tendencies, that kind of trust is rare, almost unfamiliar. But once it appears, it begins pulling them closer with a quiet force they struggle to ignore. They start showing up differently. They listen more carefully. They reveal more honestly. They begin testing emotional closeness in small steps, waiting to see if the safety they feel is real. And every time they find the same calm energy they experienced before, their confidence in the connection grows stronger. But here is the deeper truth that changes everything. This transformation does not depend on whether they fully return or not, because by the time this moment arrives, you are no longer the person who once feared losing them. You have already reclaimed something far more important: your self-respect. You now understand a truth that most people spend years learning the hard way. Love that requires you to abandon your peace is not love worth keeping. Real connection grows where both people feel free to stay, not trapped by expectations. When you carry that understanding, your entire presence changes. You no longer chase. You no longer beg. You no longer measure your worth through someone else's distance. You become someone who offers connection without losing themselves. And that kind of person is rare. Rare enough to change the way even the most avoidant heart begins to see love. And when you truly understand that truth, something inside you becomes unshakable. You stop seeing their distance as a reflection of your value. You stop interpreting silence as rejection. The emotional storm that once lived inside your mind begins to calm. Clarity replaces confusion, because now you can see the pattern for what it really was. Not a game you failed to win, not proof that you were too much or not enough. It was simply a cycle that only survives when one person keeps chasing while the other keeps retreating. The moment you stepped out of that cycle, everything changed. You reclaimed your power, and power in relationships does not come from controlling someone. It comes from controlling yourself, your reactions, your boundaries, your willingness to walk away from dynamics that drain your peace. That kind of power sends a message stronger than any words. It tells the world you are not desperate for connection. You are selective about it. You welcome closeness, but you refuse to sacrifice your dignity to keep it. And that shift transforms the way people respond to you. Because emotional strength is rare. Most people react impulsively. They chase when they feel distance. They panic when they sense uncertainty. They give more and more of themselves, hoping it will finally be enough. But when someone encounters a person who remains calm in the middle of emotional tension, it creates a different experience entirely. Your steadiness becomes grounding. Your patience becomes attractive. Your self-respect becomes impossible to ignore. Even the most guarded hearts feel that difference, especially the avoidant ones, because beneath their distance, many of them are quietly searching for something they have never truly experienced. A connection that does not threaten their freedom. A bond that does not suffocate their independence. A presence that does not demand constant emotional performance. When they encounter someone who embodies that balance, it disrupts everything they thought they understood about relationships. They begin to question their old beliefs. They begin to wonder if closeness can exist without pressure. They begin to feel something they rarely allow themselves to feel: hope. But here is the part that matters most. Your growth was never meant to be a strategy to win someone back. It was meant to free you from the exhausting need for validation, free you from relationships where your effort is never matched, free you from the silent fear that someone else's withdrawal defines your worth. That freedom is the real victory, because once you reach that place, your entire life begins shifting in ways you never expected. You attract different people who feel safe around your calm energy, people who respect your boundaries, people who recognize that your presence is not something to be taken lightly. And when someone with avoidant tendencies encounters that version of you, they feel it immediately. They sense the difference between someone who needs them and someone who chooses them. Need creates pressure. Choice creates attraction. Need chases. Choice invites.